Shabbat Shalom. Last week we saw Jacob tricking Isaac out of the blessing that Isaac was going to give Esau. And Esau was so mad about it, he was ready to kill Jacob. So Jacob's parents, especially his mother, tell him to run away to his uncle Laban in Padam Aram. And his parents hope that he will find a wife there, someone from his own tribe. And he does. In fact, when he gets there, he immediately falls in love with Rachel, his uncle Laban's daughter. However, Laban is a trickster too. And after 7 years of working for the hand of Rachel in marriage, do you know what Laban does? He tricks Jacob and gives him Leah instead, Rachel's sister. Ew! Well, Jacob still wants Rachel. So he gets Rachel too, but he has to work another 7 years for her. And then he works an additional 6 years for Laban. In total, Jacob works 20 years for Laban. And during that time, Laban changed his wages over and over and over again. And Jacob realized it's time to move on. It's time to go back home. So he has a discussion with Laban about how they're going to divvy up what Jacob has earned for Laban in these 20 years that he has worked for Laban and worked very hard. So he and Laban come to an agreement that Jacob is going to take all of the spotted and striped and speckled of the flock. And so what Laban does, he says he will take all of the solid colored from the flock. But what he does, immediately after making that agreement, Laban sends his men through the flock and he removes all of the spotted and speckled from the flock, leaving only the solid colors, which means that as Jacob continues to work for him, you would think that genetically only solid colored lambs could be born. So what is Jacob going to do? Here Laban is trying to trick him again. Well, we saw today in today's Torah portion what Jacob did. He took branches from 3 different kinds of trees and stripped them and put them in the lamb's watering trough. And he did this when the strong ones were ready to mate. And guess what? When they were mating in front of the watering trough that had these branches in it, they bore spotted and striped and speckled lambs. Those would be for Jacob. And when the weak ones were mating in front of the watering trough, Jacob removed the branches so that they would have the solid colored lambs be born. They were not as strong and healthy, and those would be Laban's. So Jacob, the trickster, tricks Laban, the bigger trickster. How did this happen? Was it magic? Why did Jacob do this? How did he know to do this? Was it magic? Was it a miracle? Was it science? Well, we know it wasn't magic because God tells us not to do magic. So it's either a miracle or it's science. But you know what? Sometimes it can be both because God made science. And even though God does not have to follow the laws he makes, he can be outside of the laws he made them. He can have higher laws, right? And he does. But God also works within the boundaries of the scientific laws that he makes. So for years and years and years, people would read this passage and think, wow, this is Jacob doing magic, or this is a miracle because God is taking care of him. Well, Adonai does say that he will take care of Jacob. He tells Jacob, I have seen how Laban has treated you over and over and over again, and I'm going to make sure that you leave with what you are due. And so this is how he does it. In later years, we have come to understand the science of epigenetics. Epigenetics is it's a science of the hereditary genes, but it's not just hereditary, what you inherit from your parents. It's also based on genes switching on and off on your DNA strand. Now, it doesn't change the DNA stays the same, but the genes are like switches that can flip on and off on the DNA strand. And when those genes, specifically the genes that will cause lambs to be spotted or striped, are the agouti genes. And if the agouti genes are all turned on, you'll end up with a lamb that looks like this. And if they're all turned off, you end up with a lamb that looks like this. And those lambs are typically not the healthiest ones. The healthiest ones typically have some of the agouti switches turned on and some of them turned off. And then you end up with lambs that look like this. And these lambs will be the healthiest, strongest ones, and those were the ones that Jacob would be taking with him. Those were the ones that would belong to him. So how do the agouti genes get switched on or off on the DNA strand? Well, this trick that Jacob did that kind of looks like magic is actually quite scientific, because the specific trees that he was stripping the branches off of and putting in the water, under the bark, there are components inside the branches that when you put them in the water, the vitamins in there are going to release. And when the mothers come up and drink that water, it's going to flip switches on or off on those DNA strands in their babies. Isn't that cool? The nutrition of the mother affects the gene sequence of her offspring, her baby lambs. So I don't know how much of that Jacob understood, but he understood enough to trust God. And if God told him to do this, well, he did it. And then miracles happened. Shabbat Shalom.